All right, we are back for another episode with the OGs, I guess. Yes. So we like to just shoot the shit a little bit here, I guess, and with our topics, but we're in the midst of, as we've kind of referenced a few times, college assessments. Sort of in that, I think every year we're going into college assessments, there's some reflection we do from how can we make the product and the process better? So we have reflection from that standpoint. We grow every year. So this year we're going to 20. So obviously the staff that's required for that grows and things like that. So there's some reflection around that. And I think just like the reflection around how everyone's able to receive that information. So we're just going to kind of chat about some of those topics. We started assessments in 2019, which is crazy. And we laugh often. So shout out to Allie Brims at Truman State at the time, and Kirsten was at Wisconsin at the time. They were kind of our two initial assessments. Riley Dawson, who I think now is going to be at somewhere. I don't know if I could say it yet. So somewhere different, but was at St. Scholastica at the time. And so, we've had these kind of initial assessments, and the process has certainly changed for us and grown for us, and what we've been able to deliver. But maybe I'm going to kick to Ashley first. What is, as we've you kind of reflect over the past few years of assessments, what do you think the biggest changes on the coach side? On the coach side for their ability to receive that information, their desire to get that information. I think this could probably, be a pretty big question, but whether, one or two of the biggest changes you've seen over the past few years as far as the coaches receiving that information.
I think it is kind of runs parallel to even the evolution we've had within our walls of OGX, which is the transition or the evolution from just understanding data to understanding how to apply data to a system. And I think that that is what coaches, I think, are starting to realize now, that a couple of years ago, if you had a Rapsodo, it was I'm doing my job. I got a Rapsodo. And now everyone's realizing that is the bare, that's great. It's better than not having anything, but that's the bare minimum. I can't just have data and be looking at it on the spot and not be understanding it in the back end, or not knowing what am I remeasuring? When am I remeasuring? What is that an indicator of? So I think the first year, maybe not 2019, that is technically the first year. But I think a few years ago when we started doing college assessments, we didn't even offer consulting. Think how ridiculous that is. Honestly, there is no product without the consulting. The assessments are to kick off consulting. Now, to the extent at which how much consulting a school is doing is all up to their preference and, budget limitations, et cetera, et cetera. But it's about gathering the information. That alone is not it. It's then being able to lay out, okay, here's what I think this athlete's plan should be. Here's how we would know how to attack that, what you should look for in its growth, maybe how frequently you should measure that. It's setting them up to then create some sort of mini system. It's not replicating our system. It can't possibly be that robust because of, obviously, we're in the sole world of player development. But I think that's the biggest thing, is that coaches are understanding that it's not just a one-time deal. The assessment day, the assessment debrief is not it. That can't just be it. It's got to be sort of that ongoing follow through. And that's obviously what consulting really is about, is walking them through those steps. So I would say that's the biggest thing. We're not having coaches anymore. We're not going into schools that don't have anything or any way to measure things on their own. They don't have relationships with their strength and conditioning coach anymore. Laura, you remember this, you can attest to this. Those first couple of years, it was about us telling them that they should establish a relationship and a close relationship with AT, strength coach. And it was sort of educating them on setting up a system. And now I feel that's kind of known. So it's really about what is your system going to be? Mm-hmm. How are your athletes? What's the individuality of your athletes within that system? And now let's help you kick that off. And then for some schools, keep following you through it all year long. I think that's the biggest change. And I think that's been so powerful, because now it's going beyond data. It's not a camp. It's not a one-day measurement. It's something that really has an impact, because it's not you get this information, Godspeed, good luck with it,
Right.
Yeah, it's more of a like, no, we've got to really understand how this we'll keep following this throughout the off season into preseason, and oftentimes to know what should we look for in season as well. Like this concept of like pitcher management. It's just like it's systems. It's systems and yeah, it's huge shift. I think it's a huge shift. I don't think anybody that we're going into this year is like, I thought we would just get a report and never talk to you again. You know, like I think they pretty much get it at this point.
Yeah, I would say two things on that. One is I obviously do a lot of the front end, admin side and laying out some of the onboarding papers that we give them. And I think to sort of attest to that, the conversations have been so much more about how our visit kicks off the start of some sort of something for them, so as they're looking at dates and understanding the structure of our visit, they in some ways, obviously there's still some, it's colleges and it's, we had to go through all the hoops and all of that of working with a university. But so, we can't think that far ahead, but in some ways we're able to think so much far ahead because they lay out like their fall schedule and think about how starting with us, really kicks off some things with our pitchers. So that has been really different. The other one is very small, but I would say it's like a smaller logistic. But this is we had many. Then this was just 3 years ago. So really, we kicked off our current assessment process in 22, and so in 22. The large majority, we did 10 that year, and the large majority of universities that year had 4 pitchers. So I think that staff sizes like that no, we don't have any. I was gonna say, I think we had one that has 4 because there was like some injuries, but we have 0 with 4, a couple with 5. The large majority was 6 to 8 pitchers. So I think staff sizes have clearly gotten bigger, in a very short period of time. A lot of these schools are the same schools, that we've gone to each year. So their staff is increasing in size. And I think we have obviously seen the shifts in the game. I think there's a lot of things dictating it, injuries, like you can go into a lot of different reasons, matchups, all of the better understanding of workload, but in a very, very, I know we get frustrated sometimes with like things like it's not moving fast enough, it's not changing. But when you think that really softball, we got our episode on 2018, right? I think 2018 was and that was when it was like not even correct data and, a lot of issues from that standpoint. So if you think in 5 years since softball got access to any data, that we've changed in the ways we have seen, and really in these past 3 years where we've started having conversations about workload and things like that staff sizes are doubling in cases. I think it's pretty, a testament to how fast softball is willing to change when they're given the information that they need. And so I think that has been cool to watch. A lot more work for us, but cool to watch from the standpoint of the game and the growth. So yeah.
Real quick, hard to talk about having Rep Soto in 2018 without what we talked about a few weeks ago with like where it was 1.0, where you had to set that up behind the backstop. The calibration was like, you
hit it.
I mean, unbearable. Like, so shout out, I guess, to whoever decided to put that freaking tank on the ground. But like calibrating it was like literally like, don't breathe. And then it would take you 10 minutes and then one pitch and it would just get blown apart. You can't not talk about having Rep Soto in 2018 without referencing how unbelievable that model was. And we all thought it was amazing. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, we're like, this makes sense. Let's put a tiny pole behind the catcher.
Yeah, like, come on, man. Laura, I'm kind of curious to hear your perspective on this, particularly because, you and I do a lot of them together. We happen to be like paired with them a lot. And like, especially schools we return to, it's like they gravitate, they're like AT shows up, the strength coach shows up, and they just like hold your hand and like hold your hand through the whole assessment. So anyway, your thoughts on that evolution versus a couple years ago where it was like, can you invite them?
Right. Yeah, no, it's a perfect point. The conversations that I've been able to have even on campus when we're there, of just getting to know their support staff, right? The rest of the performance team, the strength coach, the AT, even the managers is such critical people who, whether there is not a player development person specifically and the managers are the ones that are handling the tech. Oftentimes we walk in there and they're like, can you help us fix a piece of tech? Right. And we can help them troubleshoot and help them kind of
like, unfortunately, yes, we can.
Unfortunately, yes,
unfortunately, we're the best in the business. Damn it.
Yep. So, I like those opportunities because I like to reduce barriers, right? That's my whole jam with this process is like, let's reduce barriers. Let's problem solve. We talked last week about a solution oriented conversation, right? And not talking about these barriers as if they're immovable, but what can you do with what you have? And that conversation is getting a lot easier with the rest of the performance staff. Like the schools we've gone to, we've worked with those coaches in some capacity before, but what we go in there with is this like trust, and the trust extends not just through the coaching staff, it is also coming up through the rest of the performance team. And I think I love having conversations with them because I just like hearing from the totality of their performance team. What are the perspectives of the strength coach, the AT? How do I help them all work together by just having them speak a common language? So that has evolved a lot where we see a strength coach and an AT, they will at least stop by, they will engage, they will, they'll want to chat at some point, they'll want to connect after the assessment. And I'll say for the schools we've gone into right now, sometimes I see some very consistent things that, give me a little insight into how their strength and conditioning is going. And everyone looks great so far. It's been a huge shift, I think, in the movement quality they come in with now. I have had the pleasure of not having a ton of conversations right now about health history, which is awesome. And I feel like we've got the schools we've gone to so far anyway, we've just got a better baseline. Yeah. We can go in and just collect that data. And I said in our team meeting yesterday, I don't know how we make this process any more efficient given what we collect, given the range of things that we collect. It's not just a movement assessment. It is not just Rapsodo. It is that biomechanics, link is so important. And I don't know how much faster we get at it, but we can get in there and collect a whole bunch of stuff and really tell a story quickly. And I think our reporting has been a huge evolution for us in the way we're communicating this information back to the coaches.
Yeah, I would say this is like very logistical, but the other thing I've noticed, even I feel like we referenced this a little bit last year, and I'm about to hit a bunch of them, but I've only been to one so far this year, but the warm-ups are so much shorter in a positive way. Like, it is very rare. I think there are, some exceptions, but to see these very drawn out, I do all this little stuff. It's like, there's so much more able to just like pitch to warm up, like, they do the dynamic or whatever they need. And then like to actually just do minimal, obviously some of our returning schools and stuff, you see them doing plyos and things like that. If there are people who follow plyo programs, but even if they don't, like the warm-ups just make so much more sense. Like there's just way less of this like build up. I think that's another sign again, in this really short window. I think we got to like acknowledge that of the coaches being educated and educating the athletes on some like really positive progress. I think that has been good. Shout out to Kirsten. She, one of the assistants was next to her when we were at U of I, and one of the kids like was on the bottom end of her velo, and the other coach was like, "Oh, are we worried about her velo?" And Kirsten's like, "She just did low intensity all summer, so like this is where she should be, and now we're gonna ramp her up." And I was like, I mean, it's just amazing conversations, like. And I think that is really exciting about, it feels less intense, less pressure in a positive way on the athletes. Like they come in, they know this isn't maybe true everywhere if we're like very brand new to someone, but there doesn't feel to be like a lot of pressure like I said, sometimes pressure is good, but in a negative way of like, we're testing you, like we're coming in to test you. Everyone's just like, cool, very open, very vulnerable because they trust that what their coaches are using it for. To help them get better. And yeah, I think that part's been cool. But like a very small point, I was like, I mean, they fly through the warm-ups. There's very little overhand throwing. I saw just like a couple, like it's just, that part is just, yes, I would say that is a huge improvement. And then, we get to keep the volume lower. They're not exhausted by the end because they warmed up so long and, we have tech issues or whatever. So that part has been cool to see too.
I think this is an extension of that, Krista, but the amount of pitch types pitchers have.
Oh,
Like,
right. That's a
when
good
they
one.
name-
That's a really good one.
Well, definitely
it's
when
kind
we're
of the same
returners.
concept.
Definitely when we're
Yeah.
returners.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the same concept. It's like when they name 6 or more, they're definitely a freshman or a transfer from a
Freshman.
place
Yeah,
we've
that's
never
right.
talked,
Freshman.
never worked with. Like,
Yeah.
that's, I think, also part of it. Like, it's like, I've got this many pitches, this many pitches, this many pitches. It's like, okay, let's roll. I think that's kind of connected to this piece of, of like the warm-ups. It's like, it's very efficient. Like, what do we need to get at? We're trying to, the idea is maximizing each pitcher. It's not, is she good or is she bad? It's what is she in her current and how do you maximize that regardless? If you've got a pitcher throwing like 58 in a drop ball, barely, versus I've got like, a 66 mile per hour, like +4 rise ball. You're still looking at like, how do you maximize her in her performance and keep her health and wellness preserved? And so that's the concept of like not good or bad. And I think this idea of efficiency is a huge part of that. It's like preserve their health, make sure we're controlling workload. If this is a big time pitcher, don't let her waste pitches on things that aren't unique to her profile. Right. Stop wasting all your pitches in warm-ups. Like all of those are connected. And I think it's all part of like systems. I definitely think the idea of our assessment, probably coaches thought a few years ago, and probably also they thought this because we said this is what it was. It's like in our minds what it was. It's just like we deliver this product and then you like get the information. But it's really much different. This idea of like, it's the kickoff to each athlete's player development journey this year. That's what the assessment process is. It's the kickoff to that. Whether you take the majority of it, we hold your hand through it, walk through week by week with you is, depending on the school, but it's the kickoff of their player development. And that means the systems around their warm-ups. And that means knowing what you should be looking for in their ball flight, what pitches to get rid of, what a good goal for her would be, how to monitor her workload appropriately, what the AT needs to know, what the strength coach needs to know, how to make sure we're on the same page, right? It's just like that. That's what I mean by the system. It's really robust and player development is really robust. I just feel like coaches are really getting that. They're just like understanding those are the pieces I need to take into account. Those are the pieces. And that's linked to performance. So like if I want the performance, which is what I'm ultimately going for, these are all the things I have to consider.
Right. Yeah. I feel like for schools that we work with many years, and this also mirrors like pitchers that train with us over a span of many years. It's like the first step is that you take away a bunch of pitches. So it's like, what is the very specific thing that you do or hopefully can do unique that would like offset someone on our staff or is just what you're able to do. Maybe it doesn't offset someone, but it's all we can tap into or whatever. Let's focus on that. And then it's like, as we come back to schools, the pitchers start getting more and more variation of that. Hopefully, not always, sometimes you can't, but they, as you clean up that basis, and it's like, okay, well now maybe we could go for an off-speed version of this, or now maybe we could add some horizontal on this or whatever it is, to start to get variation. So I remember this about like Riker's kids, and I assume we'll see the kind of this evolution as he gets back in. It's like, first we took away things, and then by the end you're like, actually they have a lot of pitches now because they've gotten all these like weird variations of it, whether it's change of speeds and things like that. It's just being able to like tick onto that base. And it's so much easier to do that when you know what you're doing, like what am I attacking for this kid? What am I going after? Then you start to get more. So I think we see that a lot. It's like they're not chasing, the places we return, the kids are not chasing random stuff that either doesn't have anything to do with them, doesn't have anything to do with like their staff and how they offset their staff. Like, they're really chasing variations of those things. So I think that's been like a cool thing to watch too on some of the returning schools. It's like then they add stuff back, or add new stuff, whatever that is.
Your question, Krista, was like, what have we seen change or evolve from the coach's standpoint? But I also want to chime in on what has really like evolved from our standpoint. This isn't just in the assessments, but the assessment reports are a really good example of it. I definitely think in the early years that personally, I don't want to speak for the two of you, but personally, I think I spent a lot of time trying to like say everything or tell everything we know or make sure they know every little piece of it. And more and more I've been reflecting even in talks at Pitch Talk of like, if it doesn't land, it doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter if what you're saying is right. If it doesn't land, it will not matter. So I definitely feel like this year's assessment reports have been most efficient in like, maybe you don't have to tell them what every single number on every single corner of the report means. Just go after what matters for that athlete. You know, like only tell them what matters. These are coaches that have so much on their plates. They have a million things going on. They're going to be listening to debriefs for 6, 7, 8 pitchers. If it is like just anything general, if it is something that it's not going to be taken into consideration, then leave it, you know, like leave it out if it's not going to be at the center of her story. So I definitely think that I feel most confident this year in our ability to just like to see what the coaches need, what information they need, what information they don't. And it's like, it's not about them knowing everything we know. It's not about them knowing about every piece of information that comes through the report. It's kind of the same, Laura, with like the UNO reports that we get. The amounts of data points and variables are, at this point, it feels infinite, right? And so there's so much there. It's like, imagine if a debrief included like, now let's show you every variable that came out of this. It's like that everyone would be sleeping 4 minutes in, you know? So it is important, I think, to really identify what matters from a research standpoint, but is not necessarily a talking point to the athlete, the coach, the parent, depending on the audience. Like, how do you get that story to be short but meaningful, get it to land? And that's an art form. That has taken us, I think, some time. It's definitely taking me a couple of years to, I think, really identify that and get a.
You don't want to hand type up memos anymore?
Stop it. I'm traumatized.
Yeah.
In the back of a car. It was like,
yeah,
gave them like a memo on each kid. Like, oh man.
But I do think early on, I felt like what would make this a good report is if they see how much we know.
Right.
No.
Well,
think about 844 exercises.
Yeah, right. Well, we
know what I'm
didn't.
saying?
Yeah, you had the confidence in the understanding and how much data we collected allows you to slim down, you know, for sure. I think that's a journey. It's the same shit as what we just said about pitches. It's like first just like, you're like, all of it. And then you're like, wait a minute, what matters? And it goes down. And I think eventually we like, you know, we'll add some stuff back in or start to vary from that. But I think that journey it's important for everything. It's like when you first come into any new thing, it's like you just want to say all the things to show like, I know this, and it's like, no one's listening.
Yeah.
So what is the thing that matters for this person? How can you get them to understand what you're saying? And that's really like, you know, it's I think the benefit of us having to be in this space where we do research, we do this high level stuff, but also at the end of the day, we have to sell it, you know, and there's an element of like, you know, we all have to practice like a sales call with it. So it's like, it has to be meaningful to the person. And we do a lot of like storytelling practice because of that. So you can't just like snooze someone with your like really awesome research. It's like, don't care at all about anything you're saying, you know? So I think that balance has been really healthy for us, which is we never sway totally into sales because of the work we do and the data we do and the research we do and our relationships on that standpoint. And that's a huge value for us, but we also don't swing totally into the research category because we can't. We're a business. So I think that that balance has actually been like very sweet spot for us to be able to do stuff that's meaningful. All right. I have a question, Laura, you can start the answers to this. What is one thing you feel like is still missing? Or like, if we just like continue to grow in this avenue, what would be the place where like, okay, if we start seeing this, then that will be like the next step of the impact of this process?
My brain goes to kind of two places. One, a little bit more of a standalone portion of our biomechanics report that is a little more visual. You know, the story that we are telling right now, it's fantastic. I've seen a lot of biomechanics reports in my career, and they've all overdone it in terms of too many graphs and too many numbers. And so that evolution, I think, has been very positive for the ability to tell the story. The multimedia side, like it's one of our last pieces that I think we really need to get out of Sheets. It's not anytime soon, but it works. And I think bringing in a little more multimedia so that it speaks a little bit more on its own. It still needs some, you know, coach support, but it speaks a little bit more on its own from a like, let's pair up some videos, let's show some things a little bit more automatically. The second thing I will say is some baseline establishment of, I would say, like capacity and workload. Like, what is their capacity for their actual workload? And whether that is a sensor on the arm, a heart rate monitor, I don't know what that looks like yet. But I think, we establish this, here's her movement quality, here's her patterns, this efficiency, here's her ball flight at baseline. But I think we as a, us as a business, but also just research in general, of getting to what can she tolerate from an intensity standpoint. I think of the freshmen who come in so exhausted because they have played still all summer. They are a major life transition, right? They are leaving home potentially for the very first time in their lives. And it's a huge stressor. And so I think some concept of like, what is the intensity of physical activity they can handle right now? Are you asking them too much, right? To guide your strength and conditioning. I think of some freshmen who've never seen a weight room before, a little bit more of that individual, like what can you actually tolerate from a stress standpoint? And that gets pretty nuanced. Again, I don't know if that's heart rate. I don't know if that's a sensor on the arm. I have no idea quite yet, but I think that's a huge piece of monitoring. We talk about workload from a pitch count standpoint, or we see the effects of it. We see fatigue and movement quality. We see power tanking. We see velocity tanking. We see loss of break. We see the effects, but we don't see the acute response. And so I think that's an interesting area that, I hope from a research standpoint that we come around the bend next year and have, something implemented. I'm not sure what that is yet, to give coaches a better idea of like, I can't push this kid too hard right now, right? Her numbers are indicating to me, whatever those numbers are, that she's stressed, right? And it's more than just like, I had a hard test, but there is some sort of chronic adaptation that is maybe not going in the right direction for her. So I think a little bit more objectiveness to like, when we say what workload is, can we establish a baseline for it? And it becomes something in addition that we monitor it's more quantitative versus just seeing when it already shows up, but keeping an eye on it as it progresses.
Yeah. I think I'm going to go for the call out, because it's what I do. We need tech that the coaches can run on their own. I mean, that 100%. Is just the reality. So I think like we have great tech solutions at a standpoint of what they're able to deliver. Someone asked me how we could be more efficient in our process. And the reality is that we could not go to schools if the tech could be done and reliably by the coaches. We don't need to go there. And the reason we have to go there is because there is just so much troubleshooting with the tech right now, whether it's, disconnecting, the reads can be bad. And like, the coaches don't know when the reads are bad because they shouldn't have to know that, or it hasn't been educated to them. So they, there's just so much. And I just think like, these are, all the solutions out there, they're field friendly solutions. That's the point of them. But if it requires the OGX staff to be there to get reliable data, and I would argue it's not field friendly. So I just think like, there's still some conversations around that. I think it's just so clearly not true that softball isn't ready for these items. They want it, but you have to make the coaches be able to use it. And I'm not saying interpret all the data. That is where people like us come in, and there are other people that can help them interpret data. So it's not like I need to be able to understand every single thing here, but like I should be able to turn on the tech and know whether what is coming out is true or false, and I think, and the tech should stay on, and there's all these different things that we could list. But the main reason at this point, it was different, as Ashley sort of has described the evolution. We used to go there because that day was part of the experience, and it really isn't anymore. It's like, the other thing is we can't even send everyone from our staff. Like, that's the craziest thing, is like, we also have to train up our own staff to make sure they are ready for the troubleshooting, the misreads. Like, Josh is as high performing as they get. And he was like, I think the arm's right here, to son, that no one's going to know what I'm saying. But I was like, no, it's not, we got to redo it. But like, it's hard. Like, it's so nuanced and it's so hard to know whether it's accurate, that even in our own staff, the level of training we have to do. You have, 3 of our highest who've been here the longest, 2 of the owners like traveling to colleges to do data collection because of the tech issues. So I think that's definitely like, and obviously we always push for that. And I think just the conversations around, it's not about I think some of the feedback we give is let's just make a simpler thing. Let's just give less data. Let's just make it. That's not, we don't need simpler. The stuff that's being spit out is not too much for the coaches to understand. And we could help them interpret it, and we could do some things from that standpoint. But the problem is that the collection of it is nearly impossible for a person who's not trained in whether the read is good, doesn't have time to be troubleshooting during, a bullpen, during a pitch. Not everywhere we go has all of these big support staffs. It's really hard. So I just think we could be doing 50 colleges if we didn't have to go to all of them. We could be making such a bigger impact. And I think there's probably some work on our standpoint about the manualness, of course, of the report and things that we continue to improve on our side. But the biggest hang up is the tech.
Yeah,
I mean, it's the tech. It's just the reliability of it and the troubleshooting with it. And I think it's just not appropriate that the feedback is, this is just how it is. I use my phone every single day and it works. So I think
I agree, Krista. I agree. And honestly, this year I've felt particularly pissed off about it because we are at this point. I mean, I would say that people on our team, I may argue that we are 3 times as qualified than the people who are in the companies in the customer service as far as troubleshooting. When I said, unfortunately, we know how to troubleshoot, it's because we are using it day in and day out in different environments with different athletes. And we know, it's too bright. We play an outdoor freaking game. The fact that some of the tech doesn't work when it's too bright or that a shadow might be coming across, even things like that piss me off so much. It's we are an outdoor game. There are so many, there are elements, and I get it. There might be extreme elements that influence it, but these are cloud and sun, this is
right. Or she steps too open. It's
yes,
right.
Something pitchers do,
yeah.
or she backswings
at Oklahoma State. They said to us, we can't get reads if they're wearing orange. I'm like, well, that seems to be a problem considering your freaking colors,
that's your school colors.
Shit like that starts to drive me insane because at this point now, as soon as we have an issue, it's I hate that this has become all of our skill set, but 340 things go in a list of what it could be. And we just start tackling one by one until we get it. It's we know all the things we have at this point. We don't really see things we've never seen before,
right. Well,
and so we just start going through the list.
This is a perfect example of you're going to blame the customer. Here, this is a perfect example. When we have
this podcast is turning out to be a lot of fun.
I'm really glad we're having this conversation.
Me too. Let's light this up.
When we are using a camera with ball flight, which is getting changed, so I think hopefully there's some addressing of this. And we know that when they talk to each other too much, we don't get reads, right? So we know that it's she opened too much, she stepped across too much, and so zeros come up. Right. So in our session, what we'll be doing is I'll slide it over a little bit and try to put it behind their body more. But what I have often a coach say, sometimes it doesn't get reads to the athlete. And I'm like, that's not what we should be saying, because now everyone's this tech is a piece of crap. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. That's not the right conversation. Actually, no, it always gets reads when it's set up appropriately and when you do it. But that you don't know that. And so we're that takes the level of trust I have of this piece of, technology and this type of data down as the athlete, as the coach, as all of that. It becomes this joke of, haha, it's so, how it goes, whatever. And we have to do that in some ways to make everyone not freak out.
Keep people from
troubleshooting.
Want to jump out the window.
But there's an
no idea
element
what you're
of
talking about.
There's an element of that's not the right conversation. So then all of a sudden we've created this cycle where we're softball coaches just aren't ready for it. It's I think we're going out of the order. Right. They are ready for it, but
this
you
just
created
happened. While we're going through specific examples, I'm happy to contribute. This just happened when we were at Texas A&M where Gianna said at camp, and that was camp, but still, it was their elite camp. They have 4 flight monitor units, and 2 are the ones they use all the time. They're paired to Insight, all that. And so they got 2 new ones. So they had set up camp like, we're going to have 4 stations. I mean, like, we're going to crush it. And they were like, our new ones don't work. And I'm thinking, there's no way the new ones don't work. You're more likely for the old ones to like get funky. So I'm like, bring them out. As Laura said, a lot of times we're like, while we're here representing the customer service department of the tech companies, tell us your issues and we will troubleshoot them for you before we leave. And so we say that to everyone. I mean, the reality is because we want them to know, because we're going to be helping them through that data throughout the year. So anyway, so she brings it out. She's like, these 2 aren't working. Of course, I think 30 seconds is like conservative here. Like, what Laura was able to do is find out that they were auto joining, trying to create lanes with Insight because they weren't being paired to Insight. They weren't working, but it's like, and so she immediately like turned off the auto join, made sure she went into the lane, separated them from Insight, because these 2 units were just working as monitors on their own, not linking to a camera. And so the auto joining was like making all this stuff crazy. And so it's just like, no, there's no chance they would have found that out by themselves. They were willing to take 2 brand new units, put them on the shelf by themselves. I think that's a good example of like this idea of like, there's no manual. There's no one walking you through it. I'm like, who in the world? It took Laura 34 seconds to figure that out. It was so easy. Then she, Gianna threw on it and was almost like, this is unbelievable. It's like, it wasn't a difficult thing, but there's no chance you would have found that on your own.
And no shot to Gianna. That is not a shot to her at all. I mean,
she's excellent.
4D by herself. That is not anything.
Yeah.
A shot to her. It's just simply, how would you know that? Right? How would you know that? I think of all, you mentioned like the, 18,000 things we do for troubleshooting. I have tried, I probably would say 6 times to write a troubleshooting manual for everything we have in our facility. And when I say like, there is not a consistent troubleshooting is like, when X happens, do this. No, it's like when it doesn't work, try all of these things in this order. It's not a specific like.
But then also when it does work, be careful for this because this might not be true. That's the other thing. Is it's also
right.
Like
that's 2 different concepts. Yes,
because there's also the reads of it. Yeah, and it's there's a lot of pieces to it, and I just think like this. I think we understand that it's technology and there are asterisks to everything. And there's just the understanding that there is some issues with, there are bugs and things happen. We're in the middle of making an app and every day we're getting, we're reporting bugs and things, but there is an element of blaming the customer that I am just like, no, like to some degree, maybe. There's always like, goodness, we're all in customer service. Like we get it. Sometimes we're like, how did they miss this? We've sent this to them 42 times. But but the amount of times, like think of what our meetings are, the amount of times I say, you're making a lot of assumptions here. You sent that to them once, like how are they going to get that? Totally. So like the onus is always on us. We're the company. So if our clients don't understand how to use our product or what our product is delivering them, the first conversation has to be on us. Are we doing our job from an education standpoint? Are we doing enough quantity? Are we doing all of that? And very rarely do we say, yeah, we're doing everything we possibly could. And it's just the client. I mean, it just doesn't happen. Like you're a client service. And I just think that part, it's so frustrating. I think just from my standpoint, I'm like the impact we had to turn people away because we just don't have the capacity to take on more people. So it's like the impact we could be making at college staffs across the country is so much higher. It could be so much higher. And really the only thing holding us back, I mean, when we went on Monday to U of I, I don't think we need to be there at all. I think that's the ultimate goal, is that they could do the data collection and just send it to us for interpretation and conversation. But definitely you don't need 2 of us. But there was a time where we were both troubleshooting our own tech. And we have time constraints. These athletes are on their individuals, you have some time constraints. So we wouldn't have, what happens if you're solo during that, and all of a sudden you can't measure the things you need to measure. And that is just, the reality of it. So I just think it's unacceptable. I mean, I think it's unacceptable. I think you just wouldn't, we say this all the time, but like, I know that it gets, like you get in a circle because it will say, obviously revenue has to drive it and all of these things, but you just wouldn't hand that to an MLB team and then be like, it's your fault. Like it just wouldn't. And so to me, it's just unacceptable. You have your client blaming. And I just think like softball, look at what we just said, how willing they are to make change when they have the resources to make change. Like the change that we have seen in player development in 2 years it has to be faster than like any other. I mean, it just has to be, like, it's so fast, but they need the education and they need the means to be able to do it. And you cannot expect them to be biomechanists running what is supposed to be coach friendly tech. So I just think it's crazy the amount of times I sense, like, what I implant. I leave tomorrow to go to 2 schools and I just squat the whole time. I'm like sore after it because it's just fixing tech for 8 hours a day. That's my job. I am the owner of a business and the tech fixer at assessments. So I just like,
Krista, the last thing that I want to say is, like, sometimes I get frustrated because, like, at Pitch Doc, we had the tech companies, that's great. And they're all like, this is what we're coming out with. This is what we're going to add to. And I'm like, stop, everybody. There is no more adding. Do not add. Stop trying to compete with each other. Make what you currently have
better.
Very good. Stop.
Don't take away. And don't add.
As soon as the conversation goes, and the next one is going to include, I'm like, I don't want to hear anything. Because how can you evolve a product that is clearly unfinished? Everyone is giving us an unfinished product, and then we are figuring out how to, like, cross the T's and dot the I's on the spot when we're there, and we're teaching other people to do it as well. So it's like, forget expanding, growing, making this better. It's like, what comes out is actually really, really powerful. We're not missing data. It just needs to be more reliable.
Yeah. And it's a hardware problem. That's what the visualization side, we know that what we are building through our app, what we have built, through Sheets it serves us, it serves our coaches, it tells a story. So what I don't want investment in is the visualization side. I want hardware solutions that can consistently, reliably, with some sense of validity, collect that information, and I can trust it. That's what I'm looking for. I don't need that data to be visualized in some fancy way. I need the tech to work. And I've said, for a couple of weeks now, I feel like the softball tech space, just like, it needs a dose of good old American capitalism. There needs to be some competition, driving innovation, that companies are competing for dollars from these programs, from clients like us, to sing their praises, and it's hard. Ash, you said it last year, and it sticks with me, of like, the tech's not great, we're great. Because of our ability to navigate
100%.
all of these issues, to navigate.
Well, I just think
it's
a bunch of bullshit that the money isn't there. It's just I'm just so over it. Like, the money's there. We're getting paid for these assessments, but it required years of investment on our part because we were willing to. And so I just think, like, now is a company that is established. I don't want to say as established, as it's funded as some of these tech companies. It's not going to require the length of investment that we had to do, because ours had to go in these, like, smaller doses, but it requires investment. And it requires a client first mindset, and it requires what is required of a good business. So I just am over that. There is lots of money. We are going to all levels of programs this year. There is plenty of money for people, and there is desire for them to invest in player development solutions, but it requires investment in marketing and making sure your product is good, and customer service, and all the things that are required. Like, you have to invest in that. And if you don't invest in it, which we see so much in the space, it's why it gets us fired up, and then say, it's softball's problem, they're not interested in it, we're not making enough money. That's just plain out bullshit. Like, that's just not the order that it goes.
It's not knowing your market. It's not knowing your market at all.
Yeah. And because that order happens for a second in, like, a professional sport like MLB, where people just bought shit because they had the money for it, that still didn't work. They didn't keep that product if it didn't work. So I think in softball, of course, people haven't seen this stuff. They hadn't seen it at the time. So yes, there's a level of investment. I would argue, yes, on some education, but not to the degree that we all keep going in circles about. It's just like, have regular contact with your clients, make sure they understand how to use it, like, get feedback on what is working for them, make sure the product's working. It's all the stuff that you just do in a business. So I just think, like, I think that's the part that gets us so fired up, is there's, like, thought about the next thing, or there's conversations about this. And it's like, you aren't investing in the current space. Are you a softball company? Is that a major arm for you? And if you are, then you invest. And that requires getting feedback from your clients. That requires taking their feedback into consideration, making your products better, having people that can answer the phone when they are struggling, making sure they're using the product. That's another thing that drives me nuts is like, you know, I just think of simplest terms like we do remote athletes. If an athlete never answers us and they're not doing remote, the amount of times we're following up on them, like, you know, just checking in, are you doing the program? How are you finding it? So like you have a way, if you are a tech company, all the tech we use have a way to know if the user is using it. So when we go places and they're like, we don't use it because it doesn't work. And they've never reached out to you. They've never followed up to say like, hey, we've seen you're not on this. Can you give us some feedback or why not? Like that's investment. That's client first. And I just think like, yeah, I think we've all had enough. And I don't know like what the solution is, but if we want to make a bigger impact there, it's ready. But that's the piece for us is like, we can't be any more efficient. Unfortunately, it's not our stuff to control. And it's just, we kind of hit these limits with what we can do. And I think as we always make calls for people, but like invest in the space, it's growing fast. People want it. It's there. You're going to reap the rewards, but it requires investment. It requires some investment in time, resources, all of that. And I think, you know, we just got to keep pushing for it. We just got to keep pushing for people to do that.
I think one of the most powerful things that the MLB has, in addition to obviously being, you know, the go-to place for professional baseball, is their independent testing. I mean, they don't allow these tech companies to come in and just like slap their stuff down and say, good enough, right? There are standards that have to be met before the MLB will consider allowing a tech to be integrated. And I just, you know, it's not just the hand-me-down concept to softball. That obviously infuriates all of us. It is the presumption that our game is ignorant enough and gullible enough to just accept whatever we get. Like that's what really, I'll say, puts a bee in my bonnet, which is a very old term, but that's what it feels like.
Bee in my bonnet.
Seriously. I had a much more.
Oh my God.
That was the PC way to say that.
Now you're just acting ridiculous, Laura. You got bees in your bonnet.
But that's what really fires me up is there is a level of like, snake oil, you know, where you're like, okay, here's this great product and we're going to tell you all about it and our marketing's going to look great and we're going to have all these flashes.
Right. And then when you ask a question, they're like, that must be a user error. You're like,
right. And there's just this acceptance of it.
We should do a breakout like room or discussion in Pitch Doc. It doesn't be like a presentation, but some sort of like breakout where like it's about
tech trauma group
and tech in the game. Yeah, tech trauma group. No, but like have them involved.
Have you ever been personally
victimized
by softball tech?
Exactly. We will make the like background music to go with it. But I definitely think we should do that. We should force like this interaction between like, let's tell you the things that we are struggling with. I think that'd be really good. The other thing I was going to say is that the only thing I did not like about this podcast is that I wasn't prepared that this was what our topic was going to be. And I would have come with like eye black on. Like
war paint.
Like I'm not in uniform for this type of mode. You know, I would have like looked.
I'm going to put my boxing gloves on.
Yeah. Well,
we'll cycle back the assessment. Come on, man.
We'll cycle back week 5 with the same topic, and then we really all will have eye black on and be like, yeah, the other day Laura smacked me open palm in the middle of the assessment, and then that's basically what we end up at the end. Like we all just like walk around like shaking zombies. Like, yeah. And that's like us. We know how to use it. This is what I'm saying. Like that is
I feel at this point I can pretty much figure out any piece of tech at this point to a certain degree. And I think Josh is in the same boat. He and I very much are very similar in our like problem solving, wanting to dig, wanting to understand. And yesterday in our facility, we're dealing some of the, you know, things that we deal with our own tech and our own facility. I was like, I have reached my limit of like what I
exhausting.
Can currently do. It's just a process that takes so much time and capacity.
Yeah. Well,
and
life is about capacity.
Right.
And so coaches have very little capacity to give. They are like, you know, the cup runneth over. So as soon as troubleshooting takes more capacity than they have, they're like, it's a goner. Right. That is why if you reached out and said, why aren't you using it? It's like, because it's too freaking hard. I have way too much on my plate. That's going to be the answer every time. Anyway, we're going around in circles at this point because now at this point, it's just a venting session, which is probably We said keep it productive, right, Laura? What was the phrase I used?
Solution oriented.
Stay solution oriented. You get 30 seconds to vent and then stay solution oriented.
Right.
That was more like 45 minutes to vent, but it felt damn good. Now we'll go solution oriented.
Yeah. It was very cathartic.
Yeah. No, I think as always, we will keep seeking for efficiencies because it helps our impact be stronger. It helps us be more, accessible to different people because we can charge less, we can offer different tiers, we can do things that, make more people be able to get access to the information. And the reason we do it is all the reasons we started with is like, I literally think a year ago, like you said, Ashley, if I start seeing bigger staffs, if I start seeing conversations around workload and like, here we are, the turnaround for all of this is so fast, less pitches, more conversation, less intimidation around data, less all of that. Like it's all here already. And so I think we're always looking to keep growing and what is the next thing that we can do, whether that's a workload, more ability to have more productive conversations around workload that get there a little faster, that have some, quantitative stuff. The work we're doing in UNO certainly will unlock new information for us to make everything more efficient. But that's what we're always seeking. And I think are like, in conclusion, where we got to at the venting session is that we want to hold everyone in the space accountable to be seeking the same things because we're all trying to keep growing the game and growing what we're doing. And so everyone needs to be kind of internally looking at how can what I provide become even better, even more useful by the people using it on a daily basis. That's what we should all be doing. So the end. Mic drop.
Done.
Yes.
Love it.
All right. Until next time, which will, it will be a surprise who you see here next Monday because it ain't going to be me and Laura. We're going to be traveling in the Southeast. So maybe we'll just mic up Riker and everyone can just watch him for an hour while we go down there. That'd be a good one. But all right. Until next time.